Hello, everybody. Sorry about the slightly late start. I thought I was all ready to go, and then I realized I was not. And I want to try to figure out some place to put my phone where I will see it a little bit, because I texted Ron to ask him if I could show you the February mini, and he has not yet replied. So, because sometimes I'll ask him and then he won't text until I'm doing the show, and it's like, well, that's not very helpful because I'm trying not to look at my phone while I'm talking to all of you. So we'll find out if I remember to look and if he remembers to text. So, all right. Hopefully everyone's doing okay. Quindy's popped up some links to my stuff. I assume somebody else is out there. I'm muted. Thank you, Queenie, for pointing that out. I'll just say hello again. What else did I say? I apologize for being late because I remembered a couple things right at the last minute that I hadn't prepared. And then I was also, so when I was waving around my phone a minute ago, I'm trying to put it someplace where I'll remember. Oh, it was just when I moved the camera. No, the mic. I was moving the mic. And I guess I touched the top of it because that's where the mute is. All right. So then let's go over here. Last week, I was working on this lady who is from the Henchmen and Hirelings box set. And I was having a lot of fun doing that. But it was fun. So the next day, I went back to working on the February miniature, which, and I happened to have gotten to a part where I needed to work on some non-metallic metal. And then after I finished that one, I wasn't 100% with that, happy with the non-metallic metal on that one either at that point. But I realized that I feel like this is just way too dark. Like, you need to have extreme dark and extreme light on non-metallic metal, but I think the proportions are off. So if I were painting this on my own and I noticed that, I would probably alter it, go back and fiddle with it a little before I continued with other things. But when I paint things on the show and I do that, sometimes I like to just leave it, because then once I get this miniature finished, she can turn into one of those figures that I do if you were at ReaperCon and you asked for critique kind of thing, and then I can do repaints on her. So I'm going to leave her like she is, even though I'm okay with it now, but the first few days I was kind of like, oh, I really want to, I got that gray paint on my palette and everything, I really want to fiddle, but I did not. So today we're going to talk about what I had said I was too tired to talk about last week, which is painting white. Snow in particular, and then there's also fur on the hats. I probably will do the fur next time because I have some reference photos and I was doing some color sampling, and I got through most of the snow. I didn't get through the fur this morning. My husband was very distracting this morning, so he kept asking me questions, and I'm easily distractible, so that was not the best mix. I mean, in terms of getting things done, I don't mind talking to my husband. But job one, before we talk about painting them, is I'm just gonna use a little blister pack for now. I'll get the palette down later when I start doing real painting. Just gonna start with pure white. So looking at them, I primed in gray, and that was probably not 100% the best choice for something that I'm going to paint. Like 70% of this is white. So what happened is I was priming like 7 or 8 things, and I like gray. Where I think it will help is it will give us, even though I haven't painted in the other items, it'll give us other value to judge the white against, because sometimes when you start painting and you just have one color, it's really easy to think, oh, it's too dark, it's too light, until you start getting other stuff on the miniature. But I suspect the white will look very blinding white. But we'll find out. Do I need this? I probably need this because of being old and everything. And then while the coat's dry, we can talk about the pictures, the reference pictures. Because, you know, now that I live in the South, I don't see snow very much. That's not true. We have snow. We actually had snow right after Christmas, which was fun. But we certainly aren't having it right now. We're not having, and this is kind of our prime time of year for snow. But we are instead having boring, boring rain. But it's not too cold, so that's nice. I am using, well, here, we'll have a teachable moment on this, I guess. Every now and then you get a brush that has, can I get in even closer? Does that help? So there is like one slightly longer hair poking out here. And it's like, it's at least 3 millimeters longer. Like it's significantly longer than the other ones. And that could cause problems. What you don't want to do is just come in, even if you got these like little nail type scissors like this. Okay, don't love the background, love the brush. Love the brush. Oh, this thing vexes me because I tested this right before I started and everything was fine. Go further down maybe. Oh my goodness. Let's try putting my hand back. I think it's just too small, so the camera assumes that I want to focus on the background. Add a little more light. So you don't just want to come in with your scissors. I've done this. I speak from experience. And not on a synthetic brush either. I did it on a good brush. And I even knew better at the time is what was kind of bizarre about that. What you do instead is you get some tweezers or a knife or something, and you pull that problem hair away from the rest of the brush head. So you don't want to pull it out because then you're decreasing the diameter of the brush head. And you don't want to just clip it where you might accidentally clip other things. So then you just clip it down a little. And now I have a nice brush head where everything is the same. You know, comes to the same point instead of that one here. Doing something else. So I'm using pure white. Anne has said this is the most pigmented white. So I figured that would... see, and there I made the classic mistake. Not going up against a Sicilian when death is in the line. The other classic mistake. Okay, I'm going to take the lightweight out. So you see this little... it looks like there's a depression and a ridge. And there really is. That is not... There's not enough paint in one part and there's more paint in the other. There really is texture that I've added because I started painting over paint that wasn't quite dry. So I lifted some of it, but I didn't lift all of it. So if I don't want to have a little dip in my snowman, I need to take that off. You can fill it, like if you've gotten further along in the painting process before you did that, you can fill it with paint or, you know, coats of brush on sealer or gloss sealer even. But since I hadn't gotten very far, I just wiped it off and I will proceed with the other guy, and then that one will be dry before it is time. Or when it is time to do his coat. It's possible my white is just a little too thick. It has been longer than I think since I did paint maintenance. Let's look at that. So my test is I like to run the brush through and have that wake fill in pretty immediately. But sometimes also just doing a stroke and seeing if there's like little ridges can help. So it's just barely a little too thick. And it may just be because, you know, I put it on a blister pack instead of my wet palette, and then I extra lights, and I was talking to you. So I just add a little bit of water, and I will go back to getting some white on the snowman. That gray looks super dark now because I took down the brightness on the camera because the white was just flaring out. So that's like a camera thing. Not the gray is a little dark. I did, I think I did 2 drops of white primer to 1 drop of black primer. And I probably would prefer like 3 drops to 1, or I might even try 4 drops to 1. I mean, I have gray primer. My gray primer is a little shiny, so I just wanted to test if mixing it myself was different. And then also, if you don't want to buy all 3, that is a way to not have to buy all 3. I will probably... It's not going back in focus. Hello. Focus on the nice snowman. I'm going to paint his eyes white too because I'm bound to want to paint them, you know, some creepy eldritch green or something like that. That will apply better over a lighter color. All right, is it mad because I'm too close or I'm not close enough? I'm not close enough, okay. And then I'm probably not going to work on the fur today, but since I have the white paint out, I might as well paint it. And I believe that these guys are called Eldritch Snowman. They are not currently available. These were one of the new 12 Days of Reaper miniatures. So it's possible that a bunch of you already got him. But there are snowmen that are available all the time, I think. Maybe Quindy can confirm for me. And I think it's like a 3-pack. They're like mean snowmen. And then, of course, you might just have miniatures that you want to paint snow bases on. Or other things you want to paint white. Oh, look there. Oh, no, that's white. I thought there was a place where I missed priming. But there is not. I feel like the focus is being very persnickety today. So that's pretty good coverage on the pure white. I mean, I'm going to need a second coat. It's dimly possible that I'll need a third coat, or that I'll need to put a little bit more in a few places. Oh, maybe I'm too zoomed in. That could be the problem. But, because you can see it's patchy. But I almost always believe that you need 2 coats anyway. Monstrous Snowmen. Yeah, that's the 3-pack, I think, and they're kind of mean because they're monstrous snowmen. And then Quindy also has put up the link to holiday mouselings who are decorating a snowman, which is adorable. So I'm pretty sure that this is dry. And even though that looks kind of textury, I don't think it is. It doesn't have that same look to me that the little depression had. I was actually casting shadows and stuff. I'm not going to go in there. That would be so deeply shadowed in between those 2 tentacles. Now, I believe Bob or Julie sculpted this, but do I know which one? And I'm not sure whether they're here today, but my guess would be Bob. But I could be wrong because I often am. One reason that I went with these guys anyway is the Santa hat will be an opportunity to discuss white fur. on another occasion, because, well, a lot of what I'm going to talk about applies to just painting white in general, because cloth could be warm or cool or whatever. There are some differences I noticed when I was looking for reference photos of white fur versus snow and snowmen. And speaking of snow, I just realized that I did not paint the base on the other one. So, and that of course is also snow. I know white is a challenging color to paint. I've certainly found it a challenging color to paint. Sometimes that's because you're too cautious about putting shadows on it. As you'll see from my reference photos in a minute, you can have deep shadows on things that are white. But then the trick becomes you have to leave enough of it white that the viewer is still going to think of it as white rather than whatever you're using your shadow color, like tan or light blue or whatever else. And then the problem I sometimes have is in my enthusiasm for trying to paint with higher contrast, I will go too dark or too, it's not blended nicely enough with the shadows, and then I spend a bunch of time dialing it back and smoothing it out. But honestly, the same thing kind of happens to me with black. I have to go up, I have to go back down, and then I have to make it as tight as possible, because what they have in common and what can make them more challenging than other colors is, so we talk about like the mid-tone, the highlights, and the shadows. So the mid-tone is kind of the overall color of the object. Like if you were to say, what color is that person's shirt? Whatever you answer is the mid-tone. So, what color is this sponge? It's like a medium blue color. But if we go back to the sponge just briefly, there are darker spots where the holes are, and then a few lighter spots where it's catching the light more or it's more worn out. Julie and Bob are confirming that Bob sculpted these snowmen. And Quindy has also found another snowman to practice on the 2001 Christmas Sophie, who is smooching a snowman. So we talk about the mid-tone, highlight, and shadow. And if you're painting something blue, like that sponge, you're using, a medium blue, a dark blue, and a light blue. But if you're painting white, your mid-tone is white. And your highlight is also white. So you're just painting shadows. And then the reverse is true with black. The mid-tone of black is black. And then you're just painting highlights. So you have to leave enough of it black or white to convey that to the viewer. So if you're painting a normal object, and there's variations on this depending on what the material is, like if you're doing something that's kind of shiny like silk or whatever, but just as a general rule, you want your mid-tone to be like 40 to 50% of the surface area of the object. And then you got your highlights and your shadows on top of that. So if you're already, if white is your mid-tone, and that needs to be 40 and 50%, and then you're also having shadows that, let's say I'm bad at math. Let's say the shadow or the highlights are going to be like at least 25%. So 25% plus 50% is 75% of this is going to ideally stay white to appear white to the viewer. And then the flip for black. I think that's dry, but based on my previous lifting stuff up, we're just going to leave that a minute and look at the reference pictures, which want my iPad? Getting my iPad under the camera is probably going to be too much fun, so let's get my phone. And Ron has not texted a reply yet. Shockingly not shocking. All right. I put these under favorites so that I wouldn't accidentally show you any of my ridiculous life. All right, I'm going to zoom out a little. So, this picture, I mean, I wouldn't say that it looks neutral gray, but it's pretty gray. I mean, there might be a little bit of blue or a little bit of a warmer gray. But in this picture, the shadow colors look fairly neutral. If we look at this one was this the interesting one? Yes. So I did some of that thing where I go through and I pick out colors with the computer. So there are some warm shadows here and cool shadows. So that was kind of interesting. So some of these shadows here are definitely because some of the ground is peeking through. The shadows were, some of them were like slightly tan. Some of them were a little bit pinkish. It was kind of interesting. But then these shadows, you know, like the long shadow that he's casting, the deeper areas there, the little depressions in various parts of the snow, those definitely had blue tones to them. What else we got? This guy, again, looks pretty neutral gray, but there, you know, you could almost even say there's a little bit of purple or other things. You can put color in the shadows is part of what I'm getting at. Now this is like super blue. All of these shadows were very blue. Did the person, you know, manipulate some of that in the post photo editing? I don't know. It's very possible. I got all these pictures off Unsplash, I think. Unsplash or Pexels. But even if they did, I mean, I feel like that still looks natural to us, and we tend to associate the color blue with cool, with ice, with glaciers. So it's a pretty good one to use for shadows. We're not going to do the fur yet, but one of the things that I realized when I started looking at Santa hats. So there's a nice example, and he's sitting on a fur rug or something too. I guess is that the same dog? I guess that's the same dog. So it's kind of gray. This lady has a Santa hat too. But then if you go look at actual fur, there's a lot more color and richness in the shadows. So this is gray, but it's a warmer gray. I mean, it's almost a brown gray. Like you can see kind of the color in his ears is similar to the color that you're seeing in the shadow areas. So if you were painting a Santa hat that's supposed to have real fur on it, which I assume the original Santa hat did, you would do something like that. This one, it's a little bit with the pinky, purpley tones. And then, of course, you see a lot of polar bears. I mean, the pose of this polar bear is cracking me up too. But you see a lot of yellow in polar bears, but not exclusively, and you can see how different it is, even though the whole point of his white fur is blending into his surroundings. It's very different from the snow. These guys are a little less. It's still warm. It's still very warm. Got a tan, yellowy thing, although there's some gray in some parts. And there's the baby who probably, you know, this kind of face thing, maybe they don't get till they're older. The baby looks a little more yellow. But these guys don't have that yellow as strong. They have more of a warm gray. And it is still a warm gray, though. This is not a neutral gray. This is a warm gray. And then there's a little bit of blue in the snow, glacier, whatever they're standing on. And this one, again, is not super yellow. But because so many of us think about snow and ice are blue, polar bear fur is yellow, sometimes you'd want to just go with that because that's what people are expecting it to be. Sometimes it's fun to break the mold. And then this would be kind of if you just want like a moderately warm color instead of that like really yellowy. That might be the same mother and baby because it's got that gray markings there. And then here is a winter fox, I think. And again, very warm compared to what we saw in the snow. Even the warm snow the warm snow was like close to this, but this is much warmer than the warm snow. So what kind of paint colors did I grab? The first thing I noticed when I was looking at the light blues and stuff in the Reaper line is that many of the most realistic snow colors have been canceled or were special edition. So I don't know why that is. I even brought a few of those. This is military blue, which I've always loved. And I'll bump the white up a little bit just while we're looking at the colors. So that might be like a little strong, but what I can do, if I think the blues are too strong, I can mix in normal, like just neutral gray and tone it down. This carbon scoring, I think, is a little too strongly blue. Oh, I didn't show the picture with the color things, but hold on. I'll get back to that. Is that picture not here? Yes, it is. Okay. So I started doing this and then I didn't finish, which is pulling out shadow colors from with my image program. So these are pretty much, well, see, it's a mix, because that's a warm gray, that's a cool blue gray, that's a cool, that might even be like close to neutral, that's warm, that's cool. So even in this picture, where it looks mostly like, you could say, well, that just looks like normal gray. Maybe there's a touch of blue. The colors ended up being a little richer than that. But then this one that I told you was really interesting to me because it ended up having both. I had colors like this. So, like, you wouldn't even look at those on their own and think they were snow necessarily. And then there were the cooler ones that were in the deeper shadows. Where this one was just, it was all just like baby blues and light blues. And this one that was very blue, like some of them, that's a pretty saturated color. That's a pretty saturated color. Those were the deepest shadows. And I didn't touch anything on the mountains. They're super blue. I just looked at the snow and the snow sculpture. But that's a more neutral or even slightly warm gray. This one's got a purpley. So Snow Shadow that Anne invented for us, I had here somewhere, is pretty close actually to a lot of those colors. Well, let's look at some of the, so for the warmer colors, so Synth Flesh is one of the ones that's like a little purpley, a little warmer. Vampiric Shadow is another one that had some of those, you know, pinker, warmer tones. Ancient Bark is like, I don't know, let's get a neutral gray. That's a similar value. So it's just a little bit warmer. Keep my neutral grays out. Vampiric Mist, a little bit blue. Here was another, so the Ashen Brown is like a little dark. I would lighten that up, but it had those undertones if you didn't have, you know, Synth Flesh. Because that was probably from Reaper Virtual Expo. So if you didn't have stuff from Reaper Virtual Expo, you might not have that. Vampire Skin has that nice purpley warm thing. Glacier Mist for the deeper blues. There's the Snow Shadow, which looks like the two bottom pictures that I was looking at that had a lot of blue. What else we got? So this is one of the canceled ones that it was less, it's more muted. You need to mute the blues a little. Like they're blue, but they're not blue. Aged Bone is one for warm whites that's pretty nice. Twilight Blue is the mid-tone that goes with Snow Shadow, and then there's Midnight Blue that I have over here because of painting something else. Now this is darker than Snow Shadows would go, but that is a very solid triad for cool snow type blue. Military Blue is another one that's canceled, but it seemed like it matched some of my samples pretty well for the darkest shadows. Carbon Scoring is probably another special edition, and I was trying not to pull too many of them, but wolf gray for those warmer colors. Hobgoblin blue is like, I might tone it down just a smidge. And I don't necessarily have to tone it. This is Moonstone. I don't necessarily have to tone it down while I'm painting. Like I might, but I don't have to, because you can also do stuff after. If you find that you got it wrong, you can tweak color later. So these guys should be ready for another coat, but my paint has dried out some. Get some more paint. Now what I don't know what I would do, on these figures at least, is there was that one snowman that was very interesting because it was like the lighter colored shadows had some of that warm purpley pinky hint, and then the darker shadows did the blue. But if I'm trying to paint two kinds of white and it's a miniature, I would probably decide, all right, this one's going to be warm and this one's going to be cool, sort of throughout. Maybe I could test, I don't know. But that would be my inclination, because we kind of have to simplify things and make it easier for the viewer. And I was also talking about going with stereotypes and assumptions. It's sometimes hard, like sometimes what's real isn't necessarily as important as what people think is real, and people think blue ice, blue snow shadows, blue coldness is real, and then fur would have less blue and be warm, which is mostly borne out by what we saw in the photos, but other than real life can be more complicated. But we don't have space to get too complicated because we're painting tiny guys. Also, probably you want to make your life easier. Like, unless you're painting a Reaper kind of entry where you have like a giant snowman and lots of room to work and lots of time to work in, you probably don't want to deal with like two kinds of color temperatures for your snow. But I just figure it's always good to look at reality and see what's actually happening there, because we get these ideas of this is what looks real, and we are often wrong. Like, we've just saved basic information about things sometimes in our memories. We have not saved detailed pictures the way we think we have. We've kind of saved facts and shortcuts rather than, here, sit down and look at these colors and identify which ones you would see in the shadows of snow, sort of thing. I am generally in favor of not using neutral grays regardless of what you're painting, unless it's something artificial. There would not be a lot of neutral grays. But what you can do is use neutral grays and then mess around with the color later, which is what I often do for non-metallic metal. Oh, I did get the little fur on the end of his hat. So what I didn't actually sit down and decide before the show was which white am I painting on each. Like, I have two of these. I don't want to paint them identically. The point is to explore the way we can make white look different with different shadow colors. But I didn't really think about, I mean, obviously I want to go with the nice glacial blue type of thing for one of them, but what do I want to do on the other guy? Guess I could make it like just the more subtle type of glue, or maybe even see if I can mix in some of those purple things. There was a little bit of teal blue in some of the things I was looking at. Hello, focus. I don't know if I brought any over, but I can just grab green and make it happen. We need just a tiny touch of green. Checking for bubbles up there. I didn't really do that before. And those little depressions in the fur are the kind of thing that I find I get bubbles in, especially if I'm painting fast. Which I often do with base coats because they're boring to me. I mean, there might be someone out there who loves doing them. There are people who love assembling miniatures, and we all know that isn't me either. Although, that is what I will do. Well, this is drying. I had this thing on my desk, and I was going to do it last week. And then I didn't. Because I forgot. Because, it's fun when we can use our hobby skills for real life. So what have I got here? When we were taking out Christmas, and here's somebody white, actually. Well, okay, he's big, too. So this is one of our Christmas decorations, is Han Solo riding a Tauntaun. And Han Solo's head popped off. Which is, I have another Harrison Ford miniature where you have Indy with the torch trying to fend off the snakes. And that one had a bunch of things pop off. But I will say that these, extremely insanely priced Hallmark miniature, ornaments, they go together pretty well. Like, there's no way that I can glue this head on and get it wrong. But you see what they did here even is they chose a brighter white with a little hand of blue, and then a warmer white. And in fact, I would say he's really light gray. Like, I'm kind of tempted to just, do a little dry brush over that. Well, I'm kind of tempted to make this guy look as handsome as Han Solo should look, but I probably should talk to my husband before I start painting our holiday miniatures. So the first thing I'm going to do, when I would do this gluing miniature, is not apply the glue directly to anything in the miniature. Excuse me. And the second thing I'm going to do is see if I have a full bottle of glue. Nope, there's still some left. This is a very thick gel glue. It's Loctite Gel Control. And I had not used this previously a couple years ago. I was putting together a bunch of my Bones Pledge, and I was complaining. I don't know why I ended up whining to Ron, but I was whining to Ron about how long it was taking or whatever. And he's like, well, do you use this? And I'm like, no, never heard of it. And he's like, well, it's awesome. And he's correct. It is awesome. So ever since then, I've been using that. So I'm going to use a toothpick to apply the glue so that I don't put so much in that when I stick this head in, he gets an extra scarf because a bunch of glue pokes in. Okay, perhaps this particular toothpick has seen its day. I will file them down if they get too much glue on them, but that one was just caked up with a bunch of things. And then you can use the toothpick to kind of wipe off the excess. And then I keep it at the ready, or a fresh one actually, not this one, because it's already got glue on the end. So that if I do stick it in and there is some, glue that gets pushed up, I will wipe it off with a different toothpick. So I like these really sharp end ones, not that one. I have some very small ones, very pointy ones, that I think they're from Quaker Steak and Lube. They give these little packages of toothpicks out. Alas, ours closed down, but hopefully I have enough. So if we say that this was December and I was doing this, I would leave this 24 hours before I would hang it back up to make sure that the glue was completely cured. Because that is actually how long it takes super glue to cure. And since he's attached by his head, I definitely don't want an infirm glue attachment. So they're a little patchy because it's white. So I am going to go ahead and give them another coat. Chris said, I've been using Loctite on my Mini for 21 years, thanks to my mom's suggestion for gluing my Necron wraiths together. Wow, I didn't even know Loctite's been in business 21 years. Trying to glue that huge heavy metal body onto the tiny spine of the Necron wraiths was ridiculous. Yes, that's sometimes the construction of things is such that it becomes more frustrating. I have a lot of Darksword miniatures, and they go for slightly more realistic proportions, which is nice, other than when the hand is separate, and you're like, well, I really want to pin that hand, because, you know, it's holding the sword out, and someone's going to grab it by the hand. And then you have to get super tiny wire and fiddle with a super tiny drill bit to make that happen. But I am a firm believer in pinning metal miniatures, if at all possible. Or it's not, you know, if there's like a really, sometimes with wings, there's like a whole ridge. And that's a lot more area for the glue to attach to. I'm beginning to wish that I had gotten my wet palette out for this stage. But since I was going to be moving things around my desk and looking at electronics and whatnot, I didn't want to slosh it around yet. This depression in the snowman is sculpted, and in fact, because it was a snowman, I probably could have left the other one and just called that natural variation. But it was a good moment to talk about a problem that we sometimes create for ourselves when painting, and why you need to let paint dry in between. And that can happen with even thin down paint for layers and stuff. It can still happen. It's good. The depression is going to be smaller, but sometimes you'll find like, oh, I just can't get this to look smooth, and it's a physical difference in an area of the surface. It's not that your paint isn't blending, it's that it doesn't look right because there's a little depression or raised part, which I mean, it can be the sculpt too, but you can add it yourself with paint if you work hard enough. And sometimes you need to either fill that in, or you just use a little darker or lighter paint than the surrounding area until it looks like a match. Like you're not trying to use the same color paint, you're trying to make it look like the same color paint, if that makes sense. I feel like I did that once here on the show, and I have zero idea what figure that was on. I feel like I had that problem, but I could be misremembering. I don't know if any of you out there live places where you actually are suffering with snow right now. We know Bob and Julie aren't. Sorry, I was just trying to decide if there was like a little ridge of snow around his branch arms that I should be painting white. I feel like no. Because that would make sense. You push a stick into snow, it probably, creates a little ridge. This guy's got a little piece of lint on him, which is a little less, a little straight line of hair or cloth fiber is a little harder to explain as a thing that happens in snow, but I'm just going to live with that. Because hopefully it is so small nobody would see it. All right. Green users. We had freezing temperatures a week ago. Our grapefruit tree is now unhappy. Ooh. Had it already started to, I don't know, fruit or seed or whatever it does? Hopefully not. Hopefully it will recover from the indignity. Oh, I didn't keep my phone over here where I could see if Ron's ignoring us, and he's ignoring us. All right. So now I need my palette. And to pick some of those colors to work on. And I'm not going to freak out too much about the color because, like I said, there are ways to adjust it later. So even if you kind of get it wrong in the beginning, don't despair. You can probably fix it later. The fruits are okay, but the leaves are yellowing. Interesting. I guess it just was not prepared for that to happen. So, go with these, do one with those. Start with the bluier one. I got the Moonstone Blue, the Snow Shadow, which I think does maybe have just a hair of purple. And what else? That's got a little purple too, the Night Sky. But I will go with, well, no, I kind of want to do a bluier one maybe. Let's see. Let's compare the Night Sky and the Twilight. One thing that's interesting about how saturated those shadows were is it can be tricky to have saturated shadows because we see brighter things as coming towards the viewer and duller, darker things receding. So for the challenge, I'm going to pick this Night Sky Blue, which I'm sure there's a way to mix it. I apologize for using a not in current production color. Well, could I get something similar if I mix one of these others? Let's see. I mix the current. See, there's no purple in that. Could I turn that into Night Sky Blue? Maybe I'll try turning Twilight Blue into Night Sky Blue. Or something like that. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and try to mix an exact color match because that way madness lies. I mean, not really, but I didn't get out. I usually have, I have the paints over here, the paints from the kit. But what I'm going to do instead is take some of the clear colors, since a little bit of transparency for shadows is not going to be bad things. But I'm putting them off to the side because I'm going to need very tiny amounts of this at best. We'll flip this around so there's more in view. So that's one thing you want to do with mixing, is you don't necessarily just want to add drops and drops and drops of things. And I'll also get a little bit of clear purple. And I really do mean a little bit. So I'm gonna, I'm gonna put the tip of my brush in, but then I'm even gonna take some of that off until I know how it works. And I know both. So not much happened. But I would rather start conservative. I know both the clear blue and the purple are made with very strong tinting colors. So they're potent. A little bit goes a long way. And that is the night sky blue. So I'm trying to get something like that. Let's see. And I'm already kind of close. I guess for comparison purposes, let's put the original Twilight Blue up there. So it's duller, and I've added a little bit of clear blue and a little bit of clear purple. And I feel like just even a little bit more of the purple. But even, it's hard for you to see it on the palette, I know, because of the reflection. But honestly, I cannot see everything on the palette either. So there's the original Twilight Blue. And I think I had my white down again because of the glaring. And here is the out of production night sky, which, they're not massively different. Let's do the thing that helps us see the colors better and thin it out. Maybe that wasn't enough. This one thinned out. So when I do that, you can start seeing that this is more saturated and it's a little more purple. And now let's look at the made up color I did, which maybe is too purple. And this I am not just doing to show you all. I would do something like this to test if I was, trying to get a very precise color. And I'd say close enough. I could fiddle with it more if I was like trying to match a color I'd used on my army or something, but that's not what's happening here. So I will go with that. Snow shadow. Which, if I felt like that needed a little more of the purple or whatever, which I may actually do feel like that. Chris said, I love precise color. So my approach tends to be, unless you are trying to match something like that, what you want is a color that fits what you're trying to do. Unless you are, like, if you're Anne or you're someone else and you're very practiced and comfortable with color mixing. I did not mix enough of this color, I think I discovered now. you want to get a color that looks like it works for blonde hair. You don't need to get this exact blonde from this photo for it to be realistic or blonde hair. So that my advice to people who are, starting to mix color and they haven't done it much and they feel kind of intimidated or uncomfortable about it is go for that approach. And you will be much less crazy than trying to mix an exact color match to something. But that is just my approach. I know that's not for everyone. But I think people actually, it seems like people, especially who are not very practiced artists, and I'm talking about my experiences from, I've taken oil painting classes and watercolor painting classes and stuff, but it's often the people who aren't seasoned artists who are getting the most obsessed with, I need this, I'm trying to make this color that looks exactly like this rose or whatever. And they're driving themselves nuts about it. And I think that it's because you're rarely factoring in the effect of light when you're doing that. So if you're looking at the rose from this picture and the leaves from that picture and, the sky from this other picture, the lighting conditions and all of those are different, and those colors may not look right when you smush them together. So you're better off using a limited set of colors and kind of mixing, here's a color that looks like it could be a rose or this or that. And then it's going to look more like they're all existing in the same universe. So this idea of we look at color in isolation, it's like, oh, I love the green that person painted on the cloak. I want to paint something that color green. And then even if they tell you the colors and then you use them, maybe your thing doesn't turn out looking the same. And it's not necessarily that, your paint technique was terrible compared to theirs or whatever other thing. Often it's that the rest of the colors you picked are completely different from the colors they used, but you were just like, I like that green, and you didn't think about it in the context of the whole picture or the whole miniature. So your green doesn't look the same because you don't have that same pink that they had, and you don't have the same brown that they used, and then your green looks, more green or less green or whatever other thing, because color is very relative and very much affected by what's around it. Which is partly what I figured we will find out with these snowmen over time, because once we start putting in the red hats and the brown sticks and whatnot, it may change some of these colors. So this first color, which already, we gotta pull down that light again, because we're back to the blinding white. So this color does not look like super bright blue on the paper. Hello, focusing. And it also doesn't look very dark. But when it kind of almost has more of a glow on the actual snowman, because all there is here is white and gray. There's no color context. As yet. And I may have mixed shadows that are much darker than what I'm going to need. We will find out. I'll probably do a wash on the snow on the base. And typically I find I need a darker color for a wash than for doing it like this way. Do I know why I started in the middle? No, I don't. I'll go to his head segment now. and it's rough and it's patchy. Because I'm probably going to need a second coat to build up the shadows a little. I will come back and paint the eyes white again later, but I need to. So this is a ridge, and this is how real eyelids work too. Real eyelids are not just a line. If you look at your eye from the side, the eyelid protrudes out from your eyeball. It's like actually like a ledge or something. So it casts a shadow down onto your eyeball. So underneath the eyelid should look darker right here. Some sculpts, there's not going to be room for that. It's not going to be as noticeable. But particularly the larger you start getting into giants or busts or whatever, you're not going to want to paint the eye just a flat, white or off-white or whatever color you're using. You may need to add shadows where that eyelid overhangs, and then also, if you think this is a ball, it's sloping away as it gets to the corners. So like beside the tear duct and the opposite corner of the eye often look darker. Well, and here the eye was very sloppy. And I got shadow color, and I'm just going to accept that will happen and fix it later. I'm not going to work on the snow for that same reason. I'll come back and do that later. So there I can see that a second coat is indeed getting rid of that patchy blotchy look. So sometimes you don't just need multiple coats on like a base coat for opaque coverage of putting that white over the gray. Sometimes you need it, especially if you layer by thinning your paint so that this part, the transitions are better. You're going to need another coat in the deeper recesses so that the shadow coverage is rich enough and dark enough. I'm not really going to worry about under the hat like that. I'm just going to do lining later. I may put a little there, but there's really no point in doing it as a layered thing when it's so thin that it's just going to be lining. And that's what lining is. Like where I talked about how the eyelid is actually over your eye and it's casting a shadow onto your eyeball. And then you have like a dark line is how we paint the top of, how we paint eyelashes to represent them. That dark line is really the shadow. I mean, it's partly your lashes, but it's the shadow as well. So that's what lining is. It is shadows that are so small or narrow, like where he meets the snow. That would be darker because the light can't get in there. It's a ball. It's starting to curve down. Lining is not just we stole this from comic book people and it's cartoonish and unrealistic. It represents a thing that happens in the real world where something like this scarf is overhanging. Oh, well, that's his tentacle actually. Something like this tentacle is overhanging. It's going to be casting a shadow onto the snow. We would represent that by a darker line. Alright, now I'm going to go a little darker, and this mix also has more of the purple in. Keeping it to a smaller area. And it may be the same thing where I have to do 2 coats. But it may not. I don't think I thinned it down a lot, so it may not. So now we can compare I've done the deeper level of shadow in the middle section, and you can see that definition better than, the roundness a little more there than where the big ball meets I guess it'd be better. Now he's got a scarf on, so comparing that to that is going to be a more useful comparison, I think. Which doesn't mean that this part isn't a ball that is curving down, because it is. Got a little bit of a bag under his eye. I think it's stressful to be a creepy eldritch snowman. People just won't sit down and let you take over the world. So I'm pulling down as well, and that will help minimize the stroke. So where the brush touches the miniature, where you land, you are, well, actually, let's put that the other direction. When you pull the brush off of the surface, it leaves behind a little extra bit of liquid paint in this case. There is some kind of fluid dynamics reason for this that I don't recall. But you say if we were drawing a straight line, I would have the most, like, you can even see it there a little bit. Well, maybe not, because that color was very light. Let me get a darker color and try again. So even though I'm using like really light pressure, there's a little slightly darker, and you can't always see it. Sometimes it's like microscopic. But there's a little darker dot where you pull the brush away. So if you are pulling, you're painting shadows and you're pulling your darkest color down towards, your shadow color down towards where it's going to be darker, you're working with the way the brush works. You're making things darker in the recesses. If I were doing it this way, I would be making this line worse. And there already is a line. I mean, there's absolutely a line that I will choose to deal with in a different way. I could have thinned down the paint and done this in more steps. I would say I could also wet blend it, but that's not the kind of thing that I am adept at wet blending. This kind of surface is much less forgiving for wet blending. So I'm still using the same color again. I do feel like I need to reinforce that color and build it up a little. And then if I had thinned down the paint to make the transition lines easier, which is absolutely a way to improve the problem of not liking the transition lines, I might have to do this more times than I am even. So I might have to go in with that same value mix. My way tends to be, I do a lot more steps. I think that, sorry, Chris, yeah. Guess I got off camera. I like to mix more transitions. I think Anne just does a few different transitions and she applies more coats. All right, so I'm going to go darker. And now I'm concerned. I don't want to do that thing where I go too dark and spend the rest of my life fixing it. So I'm going to try to find a less obtrusive place. So here under his armpit, that's not going to be the first place people are looking. And I think it's good. I think we can go down with the darker color. I keep that in the recesses. There was actually something I meant to do for highlights, and I did not bring the correct paint over. That will be an exploration for another day, I guess. All right, so now let's compare that. And I feel like that's getting about as deep as that should be, if not more so. And I only got down to, so this is white, and I did this one, then I did this one, and I think I'm on one of those. Crap, well, I should have noticed. I think it's probably that one. So I'm not going super dark. I'm not going as dark as that color that I mixed. I ended up mixing that color with a lighter color. But you also can't be too shy about it. Like, white has shadows. Light colors have shadows. And depending on, this is a sphere. It's a fairly gentle curve. It may not have as deep of a shadow. But you saw how deep some of those shadows were, like where the cast shadow from the snowman, really bright light like that, can make super dark shadows. And it's absolutely rough and not amazing. And I will fix that in a bit. In theory. In theory, I will fix that. I haven't painted white in a while. We'll see how this goes. But I do want those nice and dark. In fact, that probably needs to go to the full. This is the color that I mixed to try to duplicate the Twilight Shadow. And it may even be that once I, if I want his eyes to look glowing, I'm going to have to make the area around them dark to make that happen. Because something can't look light unless there is something dark to compare it to. So now what I'm going to do is go back up and just try to fix my edges a little. So I could have, thinned everything down and taken forever trying to make super nice transitions, which is absolutely how I used to paint. What I have decided is more efficient for me now is to get far enough along that I can tell, like, okay, is this the deepest shadow? Is this as far as I'm going to go? And kind of, not necessarily, I'm not blocking it in super rough, but I'm kind of blocking it in, and then I can go fiddle with the making it look nice part. So I don't have to do that over and over again as I add every next layer. Hey, Duster 333. I'm just going to say 333. And this way, I'm also breaking up my task. I'm not trying to make the decision about, is this dark enough, at the same time as where am I putting this, at the same time as am I making it smooth. The more you can split tasks up, the more likely you are to succeed. Like, I think one of the craziest things we do to ourselves in miniature painting that traditional artists don't do nearly as much is we try to get everything right at the same time. And that, I do not know why we're trying to make our lives so hard, but that is what we do. There's like a little place where, although it doesn't have to be like super smooth because there are variations in the surface, especially when I get to the bottom snow. This will be true. But I do want to smooth it out a little. And I think I may be going slightly higher up the sphere with the initial color. I think I started the shadow kind of too far down. But I am trying to remember my own advice of I have to leave a lot of the area white for it to look white. So now I am going with that that initial color. And here I might have to kind of go back and forth a little. And I can come back with white after. So even though I was talking about pulling it down to the darker areas, well, this is a lighter color now. If I pull it down to the darker areas, I'm going to be undoing some of what I did with the shadows. I'm also trying to break up the edge a little, you know, in terms of it ends here, instead of being going like that. If I make some strokes a little higher than other strokes, it's gonna simulate the unevenness of the snow a little more, and it's also going to break up that edge visually so that it is more of an optical illusion and I don't have that harsh transition line as much. Although it always looks worse on camera and it makes me crazy, but I attempt to live with it. The crazy making, I mean. I can also, if I find, and I did this on the brush, but I could mix another mix in between. But what I will often do if I'm just fixing a few places is I'll get a little bit of the one on my brush and a little bit of the other, kind of mix it on the palette, and then start putting it on the figure. Oops, wrong one. I was working on a 1/72nd scale P-47 Thunderbolt, a World War II era fighter plane. Ah, that is very different than a mystically eldritch snowman. That is the sort of thing that I am much more challenged in painting. Probably because I just talked about, before you got here, I was talking about how I don't necessarily think you have to be super precise with matching colors. Which, I mean, a plane is still going to be affected by the color of the light around it, but there's kind of a starting point for what color they would have used for the paint that you might have to be a little more precise about than my, as long as it looks like blonde hair, go ahead and use it approach. And I'm going to do that mix on the brush thing again. And then I'll have to thin down the white a little and just fix the worst looking of the initial transition points. He's still here. He's still here, but now he's blurry because I have the camera set so that I can hold the figure close to my face and it's in focus. In theory. And now the question will be if I thinned it down enough. So that seems pretty thin, but white can be challenging to work with. And now I'm pulling up for that same reason. I want the whitest bit, the little extra bit of fluid that's going to come off my brush as I pull it away from the surface, to be in the direction of where things should look whitest, which is up there. So what I wanted to do for highlights, that we will do another day, is I was going to get something like pearl white, or I feel like there was a Christmas color that was like a sparkle white, you know, interference or metallic, whatever we want to call that. So I wanted to try, you know, kind of stippling on or dry brushing on some really top highlights for that, because part of what makes us, you know, we think of snow as kind of sparkly, and it is, because the ice crystals are catching the light and stuff. So there you can kind of compare where I'm fixing the edge to where I did not fix the edge. So the colors are just as dark here and here. It's a weird optical illusion where it does not look like they are. So let's see if it stops looking like this part is darker once I fix the edge. It may not. it may be that I need to just pull the whole thing back for some reason. .3D shapes are just wild like that sometimes. Got a little bit of white too far down, so I just use the damp brush eraser. Trick. And this is, I feel like we don't always think about the pressure that you're applying the paint with, like how hard you're pushing the brush. And this is an area where developing a lighter hand can help. It's not always about your paint mix or which brush or whatever. It's, you know, like you can barely see the tip of the brush deforming because I'm pressing really, really gently. This is one of those things that when I do traditional art classes, it tends to confuse them because I will suck at a bunch of stuff, oil painting or watercolor painting, and then I'll get some things right that beginners usually don't. Like I'll do deeper shadows in watercolor painting that most people feel comfortable with because I've spent 18 years working on contrast in miniature painting. So I don't need to learn that lesson as hard because like I already learned some of it doing miniature painting. Or when I was doing the oil painting thing, like I was really surprised that even though there was like a much larger surface, there was some stuff that was even more subtle and fiddly than like a little tiny guy. And I had to use really light pressure to kind of break up an edge, which is what I'm doing now. I'm smoothing an edge. And the guy was just kind of like, how do you know how to hold the brush that light? And it's like, well, that is like my whole other painting thing is controlling the pressure of the brush. So I've spent 18 years learning to control the pressure of the brush. But if you don't think about it, if you haven't had to do that much in painting, or you don't realize that's part of what the people you're watching are doing, because you can't, it's hard to tell how much pressure someone's applying. But you know, if you see the brush starting to go like that, that's a little more pressure. If it hardly looks like the point has moved, that's how softly I'm brushing it, is that it's not even going to change the point. And this is a natural hair brush, so it is more sensitive than that brush I had earlier and had to cut the hair off of. So now, what do I think? Does the middle still look too in your face? I feel like that part looks a little too in your face. I don't know why although we can say that if the shadow looks darker on this side, I can just kind of give them a little bit of a cast shadow, and that it should be darker on that side. Yeah, maybe we say that. I will lighten up this side a little, which you all might have to remind me if I don't get to that part today that I said that. All right, good enough. But now what I have to do is fix where I got a bunch of shadow on a part that's not going to be shadow. And this is one reason why I prefer to paint shadows first, because I will very often do that. So I was getting out I'd thinned this white down, so I'm getting out some non-thin white. But I'm going to use the thinned white, first of all, to where they meet. I don't want that edge to be too stark, because there would be kind of a softness there, I think. Or a softerness. And I'm less worried about the snow on the base, which I also need to fix. But yes, for white in particular, I think it's better to start white than if I'd started with one of those blues, because I didn't know how deep I needed to go. And I also need to keep in mind what I talked about at the beginning, where it's white. So I want about 75% of the surface area to be actual white paint. So I think it's better to start with white and add shadows than to start with a light gray or a light blue or whatever you're using for your shadow colors and work up, even if that is the way you traditionally paint. Like you like to start with dark colors and work up. And the same for blue. If you're someone, or black. I like to go, start with black and then work up and then realize I did not leave 75% of the space, because it's hard to do while you're trying to do the blending and all the other stuff. And then I'm spending half my time painting, trying to just shrink all those highlights down so that there's lots of black showing. I don't think I've ever painted black spheres though, so. But this is also a nice example of why I wouldn't just use a wash on this snowman. A wash is great for bringing out texture. I'm going to do a wash on the snow on the base. But it's like a flat surface with little dips in it. The main thing that's happening with this snowman is these are 3 spheres piled on top of each other. What makes something look like a sphere is that gentle rolling away of the shadow. I mean, highlights do stuff on spheres when you're not painting white, but I'm painting white, so today I don't talk about that. But this is what people are talking about when, if you're watching painters, or the European painters in particular, so Luca may phrase it this way on Wednesdays, I don't know if he uses this terminology or not, but they talk about bringing out the form or turning the form. And that's what they're talking about, doing stuff like, I'm making this soft shadow in that area of the circle because that's what makes something look like a sphere to us. We'll need to fix the hat fur, but that can be a project for another day or later today. So I think that's about where I want it for the shadows. And now the highlights are just bringing back the white that I messed up, making the shadows. Then I'm going to do wash on that snow. And then we'll try a different color approach for the other snowman. So I feel like this is pretty, glacier blue type. It seems like the kind of blues that I saw in my reference pictures. So now I have to decide what I'm doing on the other one. So I could do those warm whites, and then the hair on that one, I guess or the fur on the hat, I could kind of go with like the polar bear yellow to separate it. So I have a warm and then a warmer white, where here I think we're going to end up with well, at this point, even if I use neutral gray, it would look like a warmer white than this, because that's one of those color is relative deals that I was talking about before. I've got blue on here. Unless I make, a cooler, darker blue, this is kind of our reference for what is cool in this scene. There is a sad cat. Is there a sad cat? Joelle. Hello. You want to come say hi to everybody? Yeah. You like to say hi. So there's Ella. She didn't get her snuggles before the show started, so she's very sad now. That's her little sad noise. But then there's also purring. You good girl? No, you're not sure? Well, I don't think you should scent mark my Optivisor. That's mine, not yours. See, she's really just, it's weird to me that cats can have the same like photogenic thing as people, because she's just not very photogenic. She's so cute and sweet looking in real life, and then she kind of was making an evil face at the camera. And you don't really make the evil face that much in real life, do you? The confused face, yes, you make that face a lot. Life is a skill testing question for you, isn't it, baby? Lucky for you, your job is just being a cat. Let me pick out paint colors while you're here. So I don't want to go like super warm with the other one. Let's see. So I think that ashen brown is like too warm. Or it's too warm and it's too dark. But it'd be the same thing as we did with the other color, where I could just mix and then mix in the white. She is a good kitty. Oh, they can hear the purr. You have a nice loud purr, don't you? Corbin doesn't. So he I guess he doesn't want us to know he's ever happy. Like, you cannot hear it at all. You really have to put your fingers right on his throat to feel any purr at all. So he purrs a lot. You just don't always know that it's happening. And he won't do this. Well, I mean, not that I could survive if he did this. I'd give myself scoliosis or something. Have to have back surgery. Because he's not a small boy. I don't know if that one is too yellowy. So I've got aged bone, which I think might be more like a polar bear color. Although not too much. So I think I'm going to go with the ancient bark and synth flesh and vampiric skin. Although I don't know. Maybe Quindy can confirm that synth flesh is not a color you can get anymore. Because I don't know for sure, but I suspect that it was Virtual Expo, Reaper Virtual Expo color. But I'm not sure if there's still like a box set that has those colors in it. I don't know. So it used to be that I could tell from the number where the paint, which line the paints came from and if they were available or not available. And then I think they ran out of some of the numbers. And now I can't always tell. Hi. Okay. You have to try really hard not to put your tail in the paint, okay? She agrees to none of those things. Putting the tail in the paint is kind of her specialty. I think she doesn't know what her tail is doing. Like, her tail has a whole separate life. And she has no idea. So this is synth flesh, maybe. Quindy says, I don't know what set it might have been, but it's definitely not available. There's some, because some of the pirate colors, you won't find them if you search for the color name. But they are still there. Okay. Well, we'll get that later. They're still there if you, there's like a box set that they're in, or two. Those little, fast palette. They're in some of the fast palette sets. So that was the synth flesh, but let's see what else we got here. This is, well, you know what? I think that this ashen brown is probably the best starting point for the making synth flesh substitute. since we aren't sure that it's in a fast palette or something. Well, that was an unnecessarily large amount of that. But I'll start with a little quick test. So I'll just take that and put some white in it. And I think we're, that's darker, but I think that is an excellent way to get synth flesh. Substitute. What's up? You gonna go down? You gotta be careful though. Okay. So, okay, that's way too bright. Alright, that is synth flesh. And the camera's a little dark because I'm painting white and... No, that is... Yes, that is synth flesh. I thought I grabbed from the ashen brown. So this is the ashen brown out of the tube, which it is a great color for things. It's an excellent color for if you're painting like pale skin and it seems like whatever you use for shadow, it looks too red, it looks too brown, it looks too orange. Like it just looks too intense and it looks weird, like spray tan or something. Ashen brown is a really good color for that kind of problem. And then I just took the ashen brown and some white. Try and match the value. And it's not exactly the same. It's a little warmer. You just need a little more white. But it's pretty close. Pretty similar concept anyway. I could add just a... Babatuk 4 says the UK store still has at least one of the RVE sets. I'm going to add just a little tiny smidge of blue to my ashen brown. And then try adding some white. And see if that looks closer. I'm not sure that it does look closer. Maybe. Just a little bit more blue even. Oh, I'm off. Frame with the palette. Nope, that was way too much blue. So that's not the answer. Maybe it's that purple. Yeah, I think it might be just a little bit of purple, does it? Do I have space on my palette left to mix these colors for me to use? Yeah, I like these, like really dull purpley colors for a variety of things. But we're going to see how they look for a snowman. Because we did the blue snowman, so that was a snowman with like blue shadows. And now I want to do one with slightly different shadows. Just for fun. Just to compare two different ways of shading white. And then eventually we'll do the fur hat and we will compare even more ways of shading white. Because it's really something you can go a lot more, you can do a lot more with than you might think you can initially. And then because of the whole color is relative thing, you can kind of take that into account when you're, picking which white to, which way to shade your whites. Base that on the other things in your picture, in your miniature figure scene. Sorry, apparently I can't like mix paint and talk at the same time, which is not super shocking, I don't think. We need white. White. Although I got a little of my shadow color in there. So Chris says it's always handy to know how to shade your whites without an H. Well, with an H in a different place and a G. Those are a different color scheme, I think. Those are more about the many interesting colors you can use to highlight your blacks, which actually these kinds of kind of purpley grays are also nice colors for shading blacks. The color I decided was too warm was this. Now this isn't like straight up that yellowy color on the polar bears, but it's closer to that. It's closer to what I would want to use on the fur. And I had this ancient bark, but we'll see. I don't think I'll end up using that. And then vampire shadow is, I can't see the pinky tone of it on my screen, but it does have like a little bit of just a little tiny, it's very light, but it has just a little tiny hint of pinky purple. And so for those of you who haven't been here before, I use a sponge. This is a damp sponge. So I wick my brush on that. I'll get paint on it because I'm not, some people like just put just the little tippy tip of their brush in the paint and then they don't have very much paint on there. I put a lot more on, but then I kind of rub it off on here, moving in a circle to form the tip. And because this is damp, it doesn't like take all the water out of the paint. So I've picked this up for two reasons. One is that sometimes there will be so much water in it that I squeeze it back into my water cup. But this side, I just spent doing that with all those whites that had blue. So all the blue shadows. And because white and these are such subtle light colors, I am flipping it over to the unused side so that I don't inadvertently get any of those blues in this completely different color scheme that I have chosen for, well, completely different color scheme that I have chosen for the other snowman. Oh, that lid went way far away. Ella is always helping like that. So that's an after the show problem to solve. So here's my second snowman. Oh, we won't compare them if I don't do this. So there's my second snowman. As yet no paint, and here's the blue based one. And for kicks, do I have a blank one of these? It appears I do not. So the when I paint things out and I show you, those are just index cards that I have. And I try to keep a blank one for various purposes. But I don't have one. But I will also I'm going to put a sample of the shadow colors on here so that we can like look at that later and compare. I will also do this so that color that I had mixed, if I was working on a contrast entry or something long term, I might go ahead and do this, make these little samples on dry paper, so that if I need to come back and mix that color again because I painted over something or something got chipped, I have something to match to when I'm trying to mix again. So I'll make a note of the colors I used, but then I will also do this so that I can kind of test the proportions that I used. And yeah, I think that's as dark as I went. So those were the bluish colors. Bill Robertson 42. So using the sponge saps less water off the brush than a paper towel would. Yes. there are people who just do it with a damp paper towel too. Like I like the sponge because it's reusable, and also when it starts getting soaking wet, I can just wring it out like that. When I use paper towel, I end up having all these like paper towels drying all over my area, because I want to reuse the paper towels as long as I can too. So the sponge ended up being a more workable system for me. But there, if you watch Michael Proctor paint on the Crow's Nest, and you can go back and watch the old ones of all of the Reaper shows on the Reaper YouTube channel. So there's a playlist for each of the shows, and you can watch the old shows. But if you watch him paint, you'll see that he's doing a similar thing. He's got a strip of damp paper towel right next to his palette, and he gets the excess off and forms the tip of his brush on there, which also, like, he used to be like a really bad brush licker. Like if you were painting with him like an hour later, he would have paint all over his lips. So part of the reason he started doing that was to help break the habit of doing that. But if there's a little, the risk with the dry paper towel is that you could take off so much water that if you've thinned your paint down so it's more transparent, then it's not going to be as transparent. Or you're going to take out, if it's a less thin thing, you're going to take out enough water that you could get kind of a chalky effect or something. I'm even seeing people say now that for dry brushing, you shouldn't be like doing that on a super dry surface. And I'm zoning on their names now. Artist Opus. Those guys have a lot of videos about cool ways to dry brush. Now they're using their dome brushes, which I had a few episodes where we used those on the show because I was curious to test them out. But they're also very similar to the makeup brushes that people are using more and more these days, where it's like a soft, short bristle round, or it's not a flat, but it's like a cat's tongue maybe shape. The round is better, but they're like a cat's tongue shape kind of works too. But anyway, using those kind of brushes, they're very soft. It's kind of a little different than using a synthetic flat, which is what a lot of us used for dry brushing forever. But they work it off. They have like a textured surface that they've primed. I've been experimenting with. I got this I can't remember what I bought, but it came with this protective piece of foam. So this is like a non-absorbent surface and that's what that is. I was getting the excess paint off the brush without like drying the paint, because then you're making it dry. It's more pigment. It's more likely to go chalky, is the theory. The sponge I feel works. I think it's also gentler on the brush than scraping it over like textured paper towel all the time. Not that this is the end of the world. Like, I'm not super precious with my brushes, but since I am mostly using sable brushes and I would like them to last as long as possible, if that prevents a little wear and tear so that I can wear and tear them my way, I'm okay with that. So now I'm back to the whole making the sphere look round thing. And yes, it already is a sphere. Bob sculpted it as a sphere. But these guys are so small. This is why we have to paint them. This is why we have to paint the shadows and the highlights and all that stuff. They don't look fully three-dimensional under normal lighting. The size and the shallowness of the texture that the size permits doesn't look fully three-dimensional. So what we're doing is simulating the effect that light would have on these shapes if they were full-sized objects. I mean, we're also adding variation from, like, you're painting something like skin, there's variation from, blushing and blood vessels and wear and tear and all that stuff. Natural things have color variation, but in terms of the why do we have to put shadows and highlights on everything, that is why. They don't really look three-dimensional. You will, if you are already someone who is practiced with doing 2D art, you draw or you
paint, or you do stuff on a tablet or whatever, the more you think of this supposedly three-dimensional object as something like that, and you do the same things you would do to add depth and shading and stuff on your drawings, the better your miniature painting will be. All of the cool things in our hobby almost are things, like non-metallic metal and this and that, and people will paint like transparent things as if you could see something behind it. It's all stuff that we're stealing off 2D artists, but the main foundational thing that we had to steal was this idea that we are simulating the way light creates areas of dark and lightness on objects. And that is how our brain interprets the shape of those objects. So we don't have a ton of color on there yet, but we can see that this looks much warmer than the like blue-based one already. But let's add a little more darkness. And see where we go from there. Just as with the blue base mixes, I am having to restate or reinforce or do multiple coats of the same value step to make it not look patchy and blotchy in the darkest shadows. And I would have expected this to happen. It's not like blue is magically different. But I think we had a few people who joined us after I talked about that, so I just thought I would mention it again. So the thinning the paint helps make this transition look nicer. Not that mine is perfect. We're circling back around to that later. But then you need to apply multiple coats to make this part have the full depth and richness that it should have. And then my challenge is remembering which part I'm on. So I'm getting a little more edge there. Maybe I didn't thin down the paint as much as I did with the blue. I don't know. But I will do the idea that I'm working out where am I putting stuff and how dark am I going. That's kind of what I'm focused on now. I'm not stressing the blending isn't perfect. I can circle back around to that. I did with the blue. So I do want to build up the, not have it be too transparent with the extra coat as necessary. But if the edges aren't pretty, that is the part I will fix later, so that I'm not trying to do everything at once and failing, because that's a lot to think about and juggle. I'm a terrible juggler. The more I can break stuff down to simple steps, the more likely I am to succeed. So I still do this a little. The sponge absolutely helps me do less of this. I never was someone who licked my brush. I have formed the tip, so sometimes I will, when it's like that, I'll form it, but only if the head is like really poofy and just seems like it needs to get under control. I would far rather do it there, or even like if I'm not sure if the tip is good, I can do it here. I will generally only do this now for extreme detail. And I think it's just that it's like this is also not going to take a ton of moisture off, and I can kind of judge the amount of moisture in a way because I'm getting the feedback visually and on my hand, I think. Or it could just be because my thumb is right there. And I need to form the tip when I'm doing like super fiddly detail stuff. But you will notice that a lot. If you watch people paint, you will notice that a lot of painters who are doing like really precise, detailed, fancy type work. They're spending as much time getting the paint on the brush, off the brush, getting the brush tip ready, as they are actually touching things to the miniature. And it becomes so automatic that we forget to tell you all about it, that that's what we're doing, because it's autopilot. Like for me, going from the palette to the sponge and then to the miniature, it's just autopilot for me to do it now. Like I always like to paint at least a little bit when I'm giving when I'm doing a painting class, like at ReaperCon, because if I don't, I might forget to mention that part if I don't sit down and paint. Because I've tried to prepare a lot of visual aids and like the cooking show thing where, okay, here's what it looks like at this stage and stuff like that, so that I can spend more time. Like I just try to explain it and then give people time to paint, and then I have more time to help look at their stuff and help them figure out, where they might be having challenges. But I find it's always valuable to paint at least a little bit, so that I remember stuff like that, stuff that I don't think about being part of the process because it's so ingrained at this point. That I think actually needs another coat of the darker one. There's some weird thing going on there. But now I'm worrying about the edge, because I'm kind of happy with the other stuff. I mean, okay, if I was painting on my own and not talking to you all, I would have spent more of a minute, looking at it, holding it back, and holding it further away, and kind of judging whether I was happy with where the shadows were and how dark the shadows are and all that stuff. Because that is another kind of thing that people you admire the painting of might be doing that you don't realize they're doing, is holding things in different distances away, pausing and thinking about stuff. Like the looking can be looking at something and figuring out whether it's working can be an important part of the process. It's not just the painting. I don't know why the lines are being such a boogery pain in the butt on that section. The transition lines, I mean. But hopefully we go to the lighter color now. And now I'm actually checking opacity. Whether it needs to be just a little more water. Because the lighter you go, the more white's in it, and there's a lot of white in these because that's how I mix the lighter colors. The more likely you are to need to add water. Most dark colors are somewhat transparent. And anything with white in it is less so. And more likely to mess you over when you're mixing it as a layer. So I'm not at the white yet. This is the next to lightest color. So the furthest edge is still going to look a little meh. Zoom in a little more even. There's too much glare. So this looks a little darker than it actually is because I normally have the brightness on the camera set more, but I started out at my usual setting and then all the white was just going and glaring out. Which can be if you try to photograph your miniatures, you'll find that ones that have a lot of white in them can seem more challenging to photograph. And it's a similar problem. Sometimes you need to dial something back so that the white isn't just going and making everything look overexposed.
Oh, how are we doing on the softness? It's better.
I don't think I did the top sphere. Quindy is sharing the YouTube channel where I mentioned you can go watch the back catalog of all the shows. If you just want to watch like the most recent Reaper Live and get all the what's coming out and all that fun news, that is, you might as well go just on Twitch to the previous videos because they keep it like a couple weeks, I think. Now, similar thing, I have to test that my white isn't too opaque. Which I might not test on my person all the time, but lighter colors are a little trickier because you can't, how am I going to test a lighter color on my light paper here? So I could use it, I could keep a gray paper like this around for testing lighter colors. Or if you just get like brown paper wrapping in a Amazon package or something, you can keep it for stuff like that. For dry brushing and getting lighter colors off, I have used like blue shop towels to be able to tell better. But I am experimenting with this idea of not using a dry absorbent surface. So I use a dry non-absorbent surface now and seeing how that works. So there's some kind of funky. So I did something funky with the paint in this section. And this is how I pan a lot. Now, I didn't always. I did used to try to get everything perfect as I went along. And then I wouldn't have enough contrast because I hadn't, focused on that enough, where everything seems very stark when you're focused on making the transitions nice and smooth, or for whatever reason. So by breaking it up more, I'm more likely to get the contrast correct. And not always. Sometimes it's like those of you who came later, I was painting this person last week. And when I looked at it the day after, I didn't want like a super shiny, brand new type of armor because this is a hireling. They're not going to have like the best stuff. But this is too dark, I think. Or the ratio of the lighter colors to the darker colors is off, and there's too much dark. And I didn't realize that while I was painting. I had to look the next day. I'm checking for Ron having answered, and he did not. Oh, it's only 2 days. I'm really tempted. And he's shown the February mini. If you go back, and this is still on Twitch too. If you go back and watch Crow's Nest from last week, he was kind of waving it around the background. So I guess you guys let me know if I show you the paint that I've been working on the February miniature that is like the free gift with purchase if you order off the Reaper website. Will you rat me out to Ron, or can I trust you? Can I trust you to look at a preview? Let me know in the chat, and I will risk the wrath of Ron. Because it's not like he watches the show, so how will he ever know otherwise? I'm not, that didn't mean to sound like bitter. There is no reason I would expect Ron to watch the show. He is a very busy man. And I'm sure we would all rather that he's out there making sure we get more cool miniatures to buy and stuff. So I would far rather he was doing that than watching my boring show. he's actually been painting lately, which is, he still hasn't finished his ogre from, when they started Reaper Live, before it was live. Yeah, if you haven't been here a while, and this stuff is over on the YouTube channel. Reaper Live used to be pre-recorded. It was still called Reaper Live, though. Is the hilarious part of that story. All right, so I haven't done the fix the parts where I got the shadowing on, but we can now compare two different approaches to white. Clavicus81. Even if we left Ron a voicemail about it, he never checks his messages anyway. True fact. All right, so I will grab that and sneak that to you, but there is two looks at white. I would say that most people will feel this blue one looks more snow. Which, because just our association with the idea that blue is cold and ice and all that kind of stuff is very strong. These colors we totally saw in things that we looked at. It might be interesting to take, because even in those things, the deeper shadows still often had a bit of blue. So if I added some of those blue shadows here, that might be interesting. Alas, it is past 5. So I will not do that today, but I may try to remember to do that next time, or just keep it like this because I kind of want to explore the different effects of, different shadow colors for white. But now, first I'm going to put the paint away before I get out the fully painted miniature. Well, the almost fully painted miniature. I still have to do the base, because I really would prefer not to have an accident. All right, so this is, he's told me her real name and I don't remember. I've been calling her Oswaldia, the Overladen, but that's not the actual name. It starts with an M. I don't remember now. And this is a 3D print, actually, and not just mine, Marina. That sounds correct. I was thinking it was something with an M. So not just mine is a 3D print. Everybody's is a 3D print. So this is a production copy. Sometimes I get 3D prints that, they make they make a few 3D prints to make the molds to make like Bones USA or something. And if they want things painted before they've made those molds, or, to come out at the same time as the production miniature, they will send us 3D prints. But this is, everybody gets a 3D print. And you know what's really nice about 3D print? There are no mold lines. It's the dream. We're living the dream. The future is now. Now, that's not to say there aren't some little things you're going to have to clean up, because when they make these, there's like still attachment points and stuff. So instead of like the metal shooting through, or the plastic shooting through the channels, which you'll get little marks on metal and plastic miniatures from that, it's support struts essentially that help hold everything up while it's being printed. So I don't know if you can tell, I wanted it to look kind of like a burlap sack, so there's a bit of a crosshatch texture there. I kind of felt like that I had to use like a million textures, because when you have a bunch of things, you can set them apart by value differences, color differences, but these are all things that are kind of blandly colored, I guess I would say. Like, you're not expecting a bright red bag and a blue painted bow or whatever. It's a million different shades of browns and grays and stuff, basically, that kind of gear. Plus, this is a hench person. They shouldn't look as fancy as, like, the main characters are going to look. So I wanted to, but I did the side-eye. I often do side-eye if the eyes are really small, because that's a nice trick to make it. And if you have trouble, you get the eyes look wonky all the time. Painting the eyes as if they're looking to the side makes your life a lot easier. But in this case, I did it because I kind of wanted, it's like she's looking at the adventure going, seriously, now you want me to carry that? I don't think that's going to happen. I was trying to go for that vibe. So I've been having fun painting that and challenging myself to paint 3 million different textures. And I think you all will enjoy her. Like, this is It's super crisp. I like the detail. Now I did pick one that it did have a little divot in the axe, which I chose to just, again, so that isn't in all of them. That little, most of them have like a nice clean axe, but I like the idea that, she gets the second rate crap. You find good stuff and then you're like, oh, well, the hireling can have my old crap now. So that is the miniature that's starting February the 1st. If you place an order of $40 or more in equivalent, whatever your currency is, you should get one of those. I think they said that the UK store got these, right? Didn't they say the UK store, they sent a bunch to them or something? Or theirs are in another material. I don't know. I feel like so if you go watch last week's Crow's Nest, you can find out all the stuff that I'm forgetting after I watched last week's Crow's Nest, where Ron talked about that miniature and the 3D printing process. Baba Took says they usually do get the miniature of the month. Unfortunately, I don't think the Australian hub does get it, and I know that this is a sore spot for people, but just to manage expectations, I think that the miniature of the month is only coming out of the US and UK hubs. So I will wrap it up, so if you have watched Crow's Nest in the past, it will now be occurring monthly, maybe with occasional additional ones, but right after my show. So it used to be Tuesdays just for an hour. It's going to switch to once a month on Mondays, but it's going to be 2 hours. So today it doesn't matter that I was leisurely in finishing up, but on those days I will try to finish faster. Although, as we all know, like last week, it's not like anyone here at Reaper is super great at starting me exactly on time, or even in the ballpark of time. Oh, the face of the miniature? Let's get it back. Yes, there we go. It's a very nicely sculpted face. And I went with like a low makeup look, like a natural look instead of cosmetics, because again, I don't, if you're doing the grunt work, I don't think you're going to bother making your face. But since it isn't a Crow's Nest week, where Quinty will have to nag me, which gently, I mean, you can do it not gently. I'm oblivious. We all know this. But I bet Quinty can find us a fun raid to some other neat thing that someone's doing so that we can continue enjoying hobby or hobby adjacent fun. So I will sign off for today, and I'll see you next week. I may continue with the white and the snow because it is a good time of year for it. So, say hi to Art of Mike Disney for me, and have a great week, everybody.